Hello, my name is Marvin Heemeyer. I am making this tape. I thought I should make it a year ago. Really didn't think it'd make any difference if I did make it, but a good friend of mine said I should make it. This tape is about my life since I come up here to Grand Lake in 1991.
Show you just a little bit of some of the crazy things that this man has done over the course of the past hour and a half.
It's one of those, it's a kind of a community that in order for you to get ahead, you have to keep the neighbor down. You've got to you got to be bad-mouthing everybody. It's tear the other guy down, however you can do it, legally, of course.
704. 704. Yeah, I'm just here at Windy Gap. Where do you want this 50 with the FMJ?
Basically, what all this is going to prove when it's all over with, I hope it's going to prove to people that meddling in your neighbor's business is destructive. It's going to come back to haunt you. And the only person you have to blame is yourself.
That's the Thompson residence. We think the vehicle is the Bulldozer's headed there. We need to have everybody evacuated out of the Thompson's residence. I copy at 1548. 305, we need you to start helping evacuate houses on this block.
You had to take me on en masse. Well, I'm going to take you on by myself.
Movement 1, Marvin's Journey.
But I've got my rights too. Maybe they're wrong when I exercise these rights, but I really don't care. I am going to exercise this right because we are given this freedom to do what we want to do until we do something wrong, and then we have to pay for it.
Marvin Heemeyer, at 22 years young, began his wayward journey to making a live-action Twisted Metal film adaptation in the state of Colorado. Initially, this wouldn't be by choice, as he'd be stationed at the Lowry Air Force Base after joining the U.S. Air Force in 1974. In his post-military life, Marv decided to make the Centennial State his home, moving to Grand Lake in 1989. Just to clear up any confusion, Grand Lake is the sister town to Granby, where most of the events take place, with only 16 miles of rural roads between them. While spending his leisure time snowmobiling the Rocky Mountain National Park, the self-described self-made single man would operate a small chain of muffler shops throughout the state. His personal expertise at welding and interest in snowmobiling made him a well-regarded businessman, and by all accounts, his enterprises went from strength to strength. As friends and neighbors described, quote, Marv would bend over backwards for anyone. As C.S. Lewis once said, even steel, as strong as it is, can be bent or broken by the right kind of pressure. And in the case of the town of Granby, they'd be left cleaning up the debris of a broken man. Literally, not metaphorically. As cordial as he is described, signs of Marv being an unhinged zealot revealed themselves early. He knew he had to break a few eggs to make a proper muffler repair omelet, such as when he threatened to kill a customer's husband after she refused to pay him for his services. Girl boss too hard or antisocial maniac? Only time will tell. And it did. It was the latter. Quote, if Marv was your friend, he was your best friend. But if he decided he was your enemy, then he was your worst and most dangerous enemy. The extent of Marv's ire reached further than just dodgy clients. The mainstream press in Granby, such as Sky High News and its chief editor, Patrick Brower, would always share a patchy relationship with a muffler repair magnate. Marv was enthusiastically in favor of legalizing gambling, going so far as to launching 2 issues of his own newspaper to rally support. Sky News vehemently opposed men having hobbies, apparently, and accused Marv of being a hired gun for the gambling interests. Quote, he accused me of being a liar. I could probably have outrun him, but he had me by 30 years and maybe 40 or 50 pounds. Necessary preamble that establishes the temperament of our protagonist aside, the heart of our tale starts in 1992. Marv entered an auction to acquire 2 acres of land from the Resolution Trust Corporation on behalf of his friend John Kleiner. Marv and John had an agreement where Marv lent him $42,000 to open an auto repair shop. Unwittingly, Marv outbid the former owner of the property, Cody Dochev, thus rocking the boat of a well-connected family in the small town of Granby. You see, Cody originally purchased the certified ready-mix which stood upon those lands in 1972 before losing the property to the saving and loans crisis of the 1990s. Marv claims Cody had berated him for several minutes in a rage after losing the auction property, although Cody himself denies ever speaking to Marv. Their fermenting grudge culminated in an incident that is so infamous that it's synonymous with the town of Granby itself.
And this guy, come to find out his name was Cody Dochev. He came back there and introduced himself to me about the rudest, most arrogant person. I mean, this guy's just a asshole. Come back and just introduced himself kinda by just giving me a tongue lashing for about 10 minutes about, who I thought I was and what I was going to do with the property. And I explained to him I was buying it for John Kleiner, and he said he wanted the property. And I said, well, I'll tell you, I'll sell you the property. I said, we were going to pay $66,000. And, I told him I was selling it to John Kleiner, who was going to start an automotive store there. And he didn't want to have anything to do with it. He said, bullshit. He says, I only got, Gus Harris was his buddy there sitting beside him, I guess. Gus wasn't going to pay more than $50,000 for it. And I says, well, I'm sorry, but I says, I can't just not come down here and spend my money and waste my time and not, make some money on it. So I offered it to him that day for what I was going to sell it to John for. Because I could tell the guy was pissed off, and I wasn't there to piss off any people. I mean, this is the only guy of all the properties that sold before his that was doing any screaming at anybody during the auction. For 160 properties were sold that day, and this is the only fool that didn't come down there with enough money to buy his property. I mean, this shows you how day late and a dollar short this fool is.
An unforeseen and unrelated oil spill with Marv's new property meant he'd have to dish out an extra $20,000 to clean up the newly acquired land. This gave his partner John Kleiner cold feet, leaving Marv the sole proprietor. As the saying goes, old habits die hard, so Marv opened Mountain View Muffler to try and recoup his losses. Unbeknownst to the town of Grand Lake, Marvin's life was about to go foobar. Up beyond all recognition. Anticipating the growing pains of a new business, Marv began working with Buddy Wilson to help with the legal side of things. Buddy had close personal links to various families within the county like the Dochevs. Therefore, he'd have an in when dealing with the bureaucracy of the municipal government. Despite this, trouble hit Marv's new business almost immediately. And this linchpin moment that would be the catalyst to the looming chaos of the future would be when Marv came at odds with Granby's sanitation board. They requested that he connect his property to the town's sewer mains, the cost of which was projected to be up to $80,000, nearly double what Marv had spent on the land itself. When Marv found out about this during a meeting of the sanitation district in 1992, he promptly stormed out of the meeting, never to connect to the local sewer mains. Despite brushing off the request and leaving Wilson to cover the details of the case, Marv had unknowingly signed up to the town sanitation district and was still subject to pay their maintenance ordinances, as he never filed for a withdrawal. This meant that at any time, the town could not only levy fines against him, but also foreclose on his property if he refused to pay.
It was in '99 that they're going to put in water and sewer to this 22 acres, or they're going to get it approved. I'm wanting my water and sewer hooked up. And I made this known in the minutes at the Planning Commission meeting and the Town Council meeting. I go down to the Water and Sanitation District and get these minutes, and I start reading them, and I really can't believe these minutes because there is not one mention of a maintenance easement being required for them in order to allow me into the sanitation district. And I was just amazed that they had changed the minutes to reflect that we hadn't talked about that.
Marv seemed to have a knack for making powerful enemies during this process, mainly in the form of the Thompsons. The Thompsons were pillars of the local community, a Granby legacy family, if you will. Since 1949, their excavation business gave them a generational link to the town as well as political sway. Dick Thompson served as the mayor of Granby, and his son, Ron Thompson, became vice president of the sanitation board that Marvin locked horns with. Prior to storming out of the meeting, Sky News editor Patrick Brower described Ron as an outspoken leader against Marv's disregard for connecting to the sewer mains and alleging that he said things to upset Marv during the deliberations. In 1997, Cody Dochev wanted to expand his concrete batch plant, buying up land in and around the family's current lot. The Town Planning Commission recommended buying Marvin's land in order to minimally affect businesses and houses on the Route 40 highway. Despite Cody and Marv agreeing to a $250,000 sell-off, the deal seemingly fizzled out with no formal arrangement.
And this guy named Wilson had made up an appraisal on my property in 1997 and came up with a value of $270,000. And I had offered this property to Cody for $250,000. I said, Cody, I'll walk away from my business. I'll get everything out of here. You buy this place, and for $250,000, which was less than the appraisal, and you're happy, I'm happy. And Cody never would. I gave him a copy of the appraisal. Never would come back to me with a counteroffer.
Instead, in the following years, Dochev would submit plans for an indoor concrete plant in the area, with the Town Planning Commission requiring that he rezone the property in the events that he bought it from Marv. And when the news reached Marvin that the Dochevs sought to rezone the land surrounding his muffler shop, he'd up the price from $250,000 to $370,000, following a reappraisal after the zoning request. Unwilling to pay, Cody attempted to compromise as he and Marv negotiated a land swap. Marv would receive a defunct subdivision of the Dochev empire in return for his current 2-acre plot. Marv, not wanting his livelihood and business operations impeded by the swap, requested that Dochev construct and expense a new building for him to continue his business operations. This led to a collapse in negotiations, with Cody claiming this would cost him like over $1 million. It was just not feasible, and Marvin just completely stonewalling any counteroffers. Fearing his entire world was at risk, Marvin pledged to oppose the rezoning and expansion of the concrete plant at every level. He led a grassroots campaign to keep big concrete out, citing the increase in noise, dust, traffic, decrease in water and air quality, having a direct effect on his own business.
Anyway, I tried to buy the property out from under it because I didn't want no friggin' concrete plant next to me, especially upwind of me. I mean, I was going to be right in the dust tail of this whole operation, and that wasn't going to work.
Despite attending every meeting of the rezoning commission, opposition to big concrete dwindled after the Dochefs made a series of pledges reassuring the town officials and the public. In April 2001, the plans for construction were approved by the board unanimously, leaving Marv with no choice but to launch a lawsuit against the town. With contracts signed and clients hired, construction for the plant was already well underway. Movement 2, Marvin's Vow.
And it's just uncanny. The after it got started, how I tried to stop it, how every time I did, I failed.
When Marvin's sewage hole reached maximum fecal capacity, he'd hatch a bright idea to use a gas pump to transfer the waste into a local irrigation ditch. When dumping waste into the town's water lines proved controversial, he attempted to illegally hook up to his neighbor's line before being reported to the sanitation district. Putting their foot down after 9 years, the district forbade Marvin from using the land until he connected to the town's sewage system. They further fined him $2,500 for the massive barrel of excrement in the ground, to which Marvin reportedly described it as a, quote, form of terrorism, before muttering, quote, "I'm just gonna bulldoze this whole place to the ground." This is what you call foreshadowing. Despite this seeming all fairly reasonable, there was a catch to abide by the commission's ruling. The Dochefs owned the land that Marv would have to cross in order to hook up to the sewer line. So in June 2001, the family used this as leverage in order to come to a, quote, reasonable resolution to the land dispute. As Joe Dochev recounted, quote, "We offered to Marv that if he dropped the lawsuit and the fight and let us proceed with the concrete plant, then he could connect to the sewer line, but Marv refused." Whether or not this quid pro quo sounds fair or reasonable to you, I'll leave it up to you. In Marv's perspective, they were coming after his livelihood, his entire world. Marv's ill-fated lawsuit against the town dragged on through April 2002, until his suit was thrown out by Grand County District Courts on all accounts. Susie Dochev at the time stated, quote, "I remember Marv was a little weird at the last meeting. Every step of the process, more and more you could see the fire burning inside of him. With the dough chefs refusing to give him an easement, Marv was unwilling to shill out tens of thousands of shekels required to connect himself to the sewage system, disputing not only the price, but the reason why he'd have to make such a hefty investment when the current system he had in place was perfectly suitable. Consequently, the town began fining Marv for every day he failed to connect to the sewage system. Marvin came to the conclusion that there was a concrete effort, pun intended, to undermine his business endeavors, accusing the board and the dough chefs of shady backroom dealings. While there's no real evidence existing for such a claim, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that a well-connected family with close ties to the town and the government would happily scratch the backs of one another, off the record of course. Regardless of his speculations, one thing was clear. Keeping his business afloat became financially unfeasible for Marvin. In defeat, Marv proceeded to make a check out to, in his words, the quote, cowards and liars department for $2,500, putting the property, building, and even his trusty Komatsu Bulldozer for an auction at $450,000, about 10 times the original purchasing price. Finalizing this auction off to a trash company called the Trash Company. There was also a leaseback agreement in place allowing Marv to continue operating within the garage until June 1st, 2004. Unfortunately for the town of Granby, but fortunately for Marv, no one was interested in purchasing his bulldozer. During this time, Marv broke up with his longtime girlfriend, Trisha, after she took up smoking again and his father's health began to wane. Marv chose to sell off his valuables and transfer all of his assets to his ailing father. Following his father's death in March 2004, his estate was willed to his siblings, effectively guaranteeing that Marvin's wealth couldn't be seized for recompensation for what he was about to do.
Need units to proceed eastbound across the bridge. Set up again at Mount Hollywood.
Some believe that through this loss of the closest man to him, not in a gay way, in a family thing, Marv would finally snap. It seems clear to me, and the members of Marv's family, that he had already come to peace with what was about to unfold. Quote, the only thing that was different this time was that he gave me a really big hug before he left. He said he'd take a better look at the place and that he wasn't sure if he'd be back for the auction of Dad's stuff. It was a little different type of goodbye. Obviously, he had made some decisions. Marvin deeded his house to a friend in March of 2004 and retreated in total isolation. He would transform the inside of his garage into a holy workshop and begin on his divine mission of self-actuated justice. Cody Dochef remarked how, quote, we thought he went off and was going to be a happy camper elsewhere. In reality, Marv was biding his time. With nothing left to tie him to this mortal plane, he sought divine providence, and so with the remaining land and bulldozer that conveniently fit inside his 6,000-foot square garage, Marv began his work on his magnum opus, a testament to his welding ability and his holy mission that would write his name in the annals of history. Marvin was about to blow Nothing Ever Happened chuds out of the water.
This is also Branstead on Road and Bridge. I got a scraper in front of what they...
As noted himself, quote, it is interesting to observe that I never got caught, especially with the 2,000-pound lift fully exposed. Somehow their vision was clouded, with insurance inspectors taking little to no notice of the massive hulking machine hastily hidden under a large tarp. Marvin came to a simple conclusion. Quote, I wasn't supposed to get caught. Welding 2 thick metal sheets over the bulldozer and filling the gap between with cement, he'd further install an air tank, a week's worth of rations, and cameras covered in 3-inch bulletproof plexiglass to feed him live images from within. Marv also fashioned 3 gun ports with a 50 caliber rifle, a .308 semi-automatic, and a .22 long rifle. After over a year and a half, his project was complete. The result? 40,000 pounds worth of concrete reinforced steel enclosed in an 85-ton Komatsu D355A bulldozer. Movement 3. Marvin's realization.
This town attorney and this Rich Daly and the dough chefs and the town council and the planning commission to show the town the real mafia type tactics that they were using.
June 4th, 2004 was clear and sunny. Marv arrived at his garage after mailing a series of audio tapes to his brother that morning, and workers at the concrete plant went about their usual routine. There was little to indicate just how quickly things would spiral into mayhem. The clock had just hit 2 p.m. when Marvin Heemeyer, equipped with a list of 107 targets, including judges, politicians, newspaper editors, and town planners, plowed the Killdozer through the side of his garage. Affectionately dubbed the Deuce Chefs, were first on Marv's personal hit list, and he'd quickly beeline for Cody's concrete plant, plowing the machine through their admin office and the batch plant, sending workers fleeing for their lives. The Dough Chef's thriving plant was wrecked. Generations of work demolished in minutes. The plant owner, Cody Dochef, witnessed the tank destroying his life's work firsthand. After firing a worker's handgun, he'd quickly jump onto the front end of the loader to confront the lumbering Killdozer. When fired upon from the dozer's various gun ports, he fled the scene and alerted the authorities.
I was screening topsoil, and a call came across the radio that a big explosion went off at the precast shop. I jumped out the loader and across the yard. That's when I saw the machine knocking the hell out of things. I thought, what the hell is that thing? It was the ugliest damn thing. Then I recognized it, and right then, I knew it was Heemeyer.
Sheriff Pohotsky recounts how he found out the news. Quote, I was off duty that day, in my driveway working on a car. I had heard gunshots and sirens and heard radio traffic about someone destroying buildings. I don't think there was any question at the time who it was while it was still going down. I felt his purpose was to destroy as much property as he could in the short time as he could. As Marv trekked at 3 miles per hour towards the town center, the machine was followed by a series of emergency vehicles. Despite Marvin glazing the dozer in a thick, steamy layer of lubricant, effectively forcing anyone who would attempt to climb it into participating in a deranged version of a Japanese game show, it was virtually impossible to climb onto the Killdozer. But Under Sheriff Glenn Traynor did manage to hitch a ride. Traynor was attempting to locate some form of entrance inside, but there was none to be found. Using a crane, Marv had entombed himself within. He knew this 85-ton behemoth was to be a sarcophagus. Marvin simply had no intention of emerging from Killdozer alive. Traynor later said, quote, I think the thing that drove me is that I knew killing him behind the wheel was the only way we were going to be able to stop this thing. The undersheriff fired 37 rounds into the hulking machine. Eventually, Traynor would have to bail to avoid falling debris, leaving the Killdozer entirely unharmed. Despite awaiting the Killdozer's arrival in the center of the town, authorities and dispatched SWAT teams found that after 200 rounds, bullets were useless. Even throwing a flashbang and explosives up the exhaust port proved futile against the makeshift tank. Checkmate, feds. Helicopters circled ahead, recording the extraordinary scene from above, transmitting it straight to live news broadcasts. With fewer and fewer options at their disposal, Granby police requisitioned an industrial scrapper that also proved unable to stop the rampage. Quote, Killdozer just knocked them out of the way like they were nothing. There is nothing you can pull out of your pocket at such an event. You have to improvise. Authorities used a reverse 911 system as a makeshift emergency alert for residents. Ultimately, all law enforcement could do was just watch and marvel at this feat of welding genius as it burrowed through the businesses of former members of the town board and planning commission. These included a local electrical company, a construction company, a Liberty Bank branch, and of course, Granby's town hall, where inside, a story hour for children was taking place. Sheriff Pohotsky would remark, when he attacked the library, my son was in there. Another resident recounted how, when I rolled down the window, you could hear gunfire. My kids were crying. They all know the librarians, and when they knew he was headed for the library, they all wanted to know if the librarians were going to be okay. Marv rammed the side of Town Hall first before circling back to destroy a children's playground, seemingly giving time for those inside to evacuate the building before Killdozer continued on with its kill streak. The next target was Sky High News, the newspaper that had consistently come at odds with Marv for over a decade at this point. They were to be his next target, with Patrick Brower, then editor-in-chief, in the crosshairs. Quote, suddenly the bulldozer goes in front of our office, makes a sharp right turn, and I watched the front of the wall of our office crumble only 10 feet away from my very body at the time. So I was inside the building when he hit it. I like to tell people if I had tripped, I might have died. but luckily I didn't trip and we quickly ran out the back. Despite all the carnage so far, in Marvin's eyes, it was the Thompsons and their presence amongst Granby's political class that were at the core of his struggles. So the Killdozer proceeded to the family's excavation plant, smashing their offices and leased buildings before setting its sights on the home of former Mayor Dick Thompson, who had passed away in 2001. His 82-year-old widow, Thelma Thompson, was luckily for Marv still alive and managed to flee the home, escaping being killdozed. The befuddled widow would say to reporters outside that once he was at her home, quote, "I just don't get it. It's just not right." What Marvin decided to do next made authorities conclude that if not stopped, the Killdozer was going to turn on civilians. He began shooting at industrial-sized propane tanks situated right next to a retirement residence. Defenders of Marv believed that he had no intention of causing an explosion, instead seeking to spark a leak, causing a hassle for organizations that he believed wronged him, such as the Environmental Protection Agency. But in fairness to Marv's detractors, he did try to shoot the propane tanks like 15 times. But in defense of Marv's defenders, blowing up old people is bad. With small arms and the SWAT teams proving ineffective, the use of an Apache attack helicopter equipped with Hellfire and Javelin anti-tank missiles was allegedly floated at the highest level of state government. Then Colorado Governor Bill Owens denied that this massive, disproportionate Israeli-style response was ever considered. Patrick Brower would note, quote, "If he had succeeded in piercing and lighting up just one tank, the explosion and tanks flying around the neighborhood would have been catastrophic and perhaps fatal. If he had lived, I think he would have been charged with attempted murder in connection with several instances during the rampage. He fired his weapons at a state trooper, at least one sheriff's deputy, and at Cody Dochev. He destroyed buildings in the town and almost managed to kill or injure children in the Granby library. He almost got me." With police resigning themselves to their current predicament, the town was at Marvin's mercy. For once, though, residents were in luck. The Killdozer's failing coolant system, already leaking a black liquid and billowing smoke, meant that Marvin's rampage was coming to a swift end. As the juggernaut smashed through the side of Gamble's Hardware, owned by another former board member, the tracks fell through the basement floor, rendering the machine immobile. Surrounded on all sides by local authorities and SWAT teams, a single, muffled gunshot was heard from within. Marvin Heemeyer, after 2 hours and 7 minutes, took his life into his own hands using a .357 Magnum, ending the rampage on his own terms. It took authorities well into the morning with an oxyacetylene torch to cut through the reinforced steel and concrete to retrieve the deceased Marvin. Movement 4. Marvin's sacrifice.
It's going to come back to haunt you. Or it can, I should say. It can come back to haunt you. And it can come back to haunt you in spades. And the only person you have to blame is yourself.
Within days of the incident, authorities, news reporters, and other voyeurs departed the small town. The $7 million in damages became just a hazy memory as the town rebuilt. Over time, the track marks left by the rampage faded. The dismantled dozer had its parts disseminated across the country. Cody Dochev's Mountain Park concrete would be operational just 3 days after the incident, and slowly, life returned to normal. The memory of Marv's outlash faded with time, to the point where most locals now residing in Granby are only passingly aware of the rampage. Undersheriff Glenn Traynor, who took a ride atop the Killdozer, said that Marvin had a great reputation around the town and never met anyone who disliked him. But in the aftermath, this seemed to change. Local opinion of Marv, that once seemed so high, all but collapsed. Granby Mayor Edward Wang told reporters, quote, "I'm trying to be politically correct, but this guy was a nasty son of a bitch. He had the maturity level of a 5-year-old. Today, the battle rages online, with Marvin entering a compendium of controversial American folk heroes that drives debates about individual rights and the role of the state in our lives. In Marvin's view, he was the victim of a conspiracy hatched in 1992 after he outbid Cody Dochev for the 2 acres of property, who never let Marvin succeed in Granby, using the levers of local government to achieve this. His own skepticism of the state, coupled with the failed negotiations, the leverage of the sewer regulations over him, rezonment of his property, and the foreclosure of his business, fueled what you may consider his righteous cause or his grand illusion. With details that vary from source to source, a chronology that is bogged down by local bureaucracy and rumors and modern recounts almost exclusively coming from Patrick Brower, a man who was not only personally involved in the case, but explicitly wants to dismantle Marvin's martyrdom, the tale of the Killdozer is admittedly pretty murky. The lack of truly unbiased sources only fuel Marvin's supporters, with groups such as the Proud Boys commemorating June 4th as Killdozer Day. Small-town politics can easily lead to the rise of petty tyrants, nepotistic boys clubs, where those with entrenched contracts can get their way outside of proper procedure. Whether or not you think this is a case of a man fighting for his right to party, or a man who simply could not handle his own misfortune, we can all agree it's pretty funny that a guy built his own tank and went on a rampage because the town had to tell him to stop dumping his own human shit in the water supply.
But it seems like this has to happen again and again and again in human nature, that we kill each other, so that the next generation looks at things differently, where they will open their mind and be open to other people's ideas. It's a cycle. As best I can see it, God is saying that the cycle is time to happen again. Hopefully it lasts longer. Maybe it won't last as long. I don't know. You people didn't have to teach me anything. All the crap that you did to me has been done to me before on a much smaller scale. I know I shouldn't have given you the benefit of the doubt. I should have learned that people are ultimately corrupt. I didn't, I guess. I'm going to have to die with it. Because I'm telling you, I will not live with it.